Today, we are going to be discussing 3 reasons as to why the Seattle Seahawks are still threats in the NFC. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. Let us go ahead and hop into it straight away. Let's start off with reason number 1 as to why the Seahawks will be threats in the NFC, and that is that this team finally has a clear identity. So in my opinion, the past couple of years, the Seahawks have almost felt like they were a team that lost their identity. Of course, a few years ago, I guess not a few years ago, it was about 10 years at this point, they were known as the Legion of Boom. They were known for their defense and Marshawn Lynch and then Russell Wilson running around making plays downfield. That was what they were known for. They had a clear identity. But when Russell Wilson and all those guys started to age out and not necessarily perform up to the same level because of age, retirement, personnel, so on and so forth, the team felt like it kind of lost its it factor, you could say. They lost their identity. And so far, it's just been kind of stagnant the past few years of this team not really having a clear identity. And I think so far this offseason, one of the main things they did was establishing what they wanted to be, specifically on the defense. Now, I still think the offense has some work to be found in terms of figuring out their offensive identity, but I think there was enough work done in the offense, which we'll talk about here in just a few moments, to give me some hope that the identity will be figured out on the offense. For me, where this team is going to be lying their identity on is going to be on this defense. The identity of the Seattle Seahawks looks like it's going to be youth, versatility, physicality, and honestly, just in general, a defensive identity, which I think is kind of what I like from my Seattle teams. Again, let's go back to 2014, 2013, when they were in those Super Bowls. They were known for their Legion of Boom. Earl Thomas at safety, Cam Chancellor at strong safety, Richard Sherman, Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett, etc. Bobby Wagner, of course, too. Can't forget him. Those guys were versatile pieces that played so well into their role. And now I look at this Seattle team, and don't get me wrong, they're not the Legion of Boom yet, but I see a lot of pieces here that offer versatility while also kind of being stars at their specific role. Let's look at the defensive line. You have guys like Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, Leonard Williams, Demarcus Lawrence, Boy Mafe. You also have some depth there too with an Uchenna Nwosu or a Derek Hall and so on and so forth. I think one of the things they've done the past few off seasons, specifically last year by adding a Byron Murphy and this year with adding a Demarcus Lawrence, giving yourself more options, more versatility, more waves of pass rushers. It's something that I have been talking about the entirety of the off season, of having multiple units of pass rushers, not just a starting 4, but having 5, 6, 7, 8 capable bodies at getting to the quarterback. And I look at this team and I think they have at least 6, potentially 7 guys that all can get after the quarterback or fill in a very specific role, like being a dominant run stuffer. Outside of them, they secured their linebackers, Tyrese Knight, Ernest Jones. Those guys are back, and I'm thinking that should be a fine duo there. And then the secondary, adding a Nicky Monwari, who to me is kind of the embodiment of what this identity is. Versatility. Can play a linebacker, can play safety. I think can honestly play a little bit of some corner too. He's got the size to play multiple positions. He's a freak athlete. We'll see if he can stay healthy and if he can be, developed properly to become that guy. But then you look at Arik Woolen, who is primarily an outside corner, but you look at a Javon Witherspoon who could play multiple positions and has that versatility to do a lot of different things. It appears to me that McDonald is trying to put his identity on this roster. Obviously, year 1, it's your first year. You're taking over a roster that has some good pieces, but it's not your roster. You're just taking over somebody else's roster, and you're trying to work the roster into what you want it to be. And it looks like so far this offseason, they cut ties with players that weren't their guys. Geno, DK, etc., and brought in their guys, brought in pieces they want to be a part of their identity. And I think when you look at all of the top contending teams, let's talk Philadelphia, Detroit, the Washington Commanders, Buffalo, Baltimore, even Kansas City to an extent. Every single one of those teams has an identity. Saquon Barkley is the identity of that Philadelphia offense. They want to be a heavy rushing attack, rely on their defense, manage the clock. Look at Washington, kind of the same story. Heavy rushing attack with Jaden Daniels, hold the clock, defense just hold your own, create some turnovers. Detroit, heavy rushing attack with the defense that is going to be swarming, physical, and they're going to bite your kneecaps off, like Dan Campbell likes to say. Kansas City might actually be one of the best sort of comparisons here, because that is funnily enough, even though we talk Mahomes, Kelce, and those guys, that's a defensive team at this stage. They're entering into, the late Patriots era where they were just completely, in a sense, relying on that defense and pushing, playoffs and Super Bowls with how good their defense was. And that's kind of where the Chiefs are at now, with versatility on their defense and superstars there. That's a defensive identified team. Baltimore has kind of a mixture of both, where they have that rushing offense, that passing threat with Lamar, but identity-wise, you can't ignore that defense either. So I look at the Seattle team, and I don't think they're up there quite yet with those teams, but I do think they're building it in a way to eventually be up there with those teams. When people look at the Seahawks team, they're going to say, oh, this is a team, they want to out-possession you, they want to manage the clock, and they want to rely on that defense to create turnovers, to play physical, to get off the field, and give their offense more opportunities to put up points. So I'm looking at this defense, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing, and I'm looking at the culture and the identity of Seattle, something that I think has been lacking, for better or for worse, for probably the past 4 or 5 years at this stage. I think now that you're getting off the Wilson era, you're getting off of even the Geno Smith era now, you're moving off of certain pieces, but you're keeping your guys, you're getting rid of some guys, you're adding your guys, and I think they're building an identity that could be pretty fun to see the next couple years. Let's talk about reason number 2 as to why I think they are threats in the NFC, and that is the fact that I think they have an improved offense. Now, I want to make something a little bit clear here. And I'm going to defend a player that's out the door. I do want to give a little bit of some grace to Geno Smith. I feel like there's a lot of Seahawks fans that maybe aren't like saying bad things about Geno or anything like that, but occasionally Geno Smith will have a highlight in training camp and Seahawks fans will, they'll poke a little fun at it. And I understand Geno did not get this team to much playoff success or a title or anything like that, but I think Geno Smith is pretty darn good for the team, all things considered. I think one of the issues this team has been struggling with the past few years was the health of their offensive line and just, frankly, the quality of the offensive line. And one of the issues this team had last year was Geno Smith did not have enough time to seriously go through his reads. I also thought kind of towards the back end of the year, he had no trust in the offensive line. There was not a dominant enough ground game. They were really an imbalanced team because when they tried to run, they really had no success. And that's not because they don't have talented backs. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet are talented backs. That offensive line was just not good enough. And DK was inconsistent. You don't really have a great tight end, and et cetera, et cetera. So they had all these kind of minor issues that primarily stemmed from the offensive line. So what did they do this offseason? Well, they addressed the offensive line with their first-round pick in Gray Zabel, who can play tackle, he can play guard. I think he can play center if you really wanted him to. Now, I still think the offensive line is a kind of work in progress. I think it obviously depends on the health of this unit. If Cross can stay healthy, if Lucas can especially stay healthy, then your tackles are probably pretty good. It's just kind of a health thing. Gray Zabel probably mans one of the guard spots, and then Olu probably at center. And, we'll see what happens with that right guard spot. Is it Anthony Bradford? Will it be Christian Haynes? We'll see. I definitely think in the future, potentially next offseason, you'll want to double down on offensive line. But at least on paper, this offensive line should be a lot better, if healthy, than what it was last year. You trade out DK Metcalf to Pittsburgh, which was honestly a bit of a shocker. Same with the Geno Smith move as well. I was a little surprised they did it. Funnily enough, I actually was thinking that Seattle was going to have kind of a boring offseason, and it kind of turns out they had arguably one of the more fun off seasons of any team in the NFL. So let's talk about the DK and the Cooper Kupp move. So you went ahead and moved off of DK Metcalf. Now, what did DK present that this team is kind of going to be lacking now? It's a big body, physical downfield receiver that at times can just sort of take over games. Unfortunately, the team doesn't have that right now. You did draft a Torrey Horton. Jake Bobo is a little bit of a bigger dude. Marquez Valdes-Scantling has the size, definitely not the physicality element. But you replace a DK Metcalf with the Cooper Kupp. Now, in a lot of ways, Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith-Njigba are somewhat similar. Now, I think JSN is a better player at this stage of his career, and I do think JSN is somebody who can develop to becoming a really good quality wide receiver one. By the way, if you're in fantasy football, I think JSN should be drafted a lot higher than where he's probably going to get drafted at. So keep an eye on him in your drafts. He's going to be playing a massive role this offseason. But when I look at Cooper Kupp, primarily a slot guy, can do a little thing here and there on the outside, but primarily going to play in the slot. And I just look at JSN and Cooper Kupp and say, yeah, good luck stuffing these guys in the short to intermediate game. These are technical receivers. They don't really win with speed or athleticism or, an over physicality element to them, but they are technically sound, crisp route runners, unbelievably smart, know how to find space. And if Darnold has a good connection with both these guys, and if they can stay on track, this offense should be really fun in terms of the passing part. right? So you get off of DK and you lose out that downfield presence, but then you also add a Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who I think actually perfectly fits this system, because you're going to have JSN and Cooper Kupp working a lot in the intermediate and underneath game, and you're going to have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, honestly, probably running track meets out there, deep bombs, downfield, over and over and over again to create some space for those guys underneath. Same thing with Elijah Arroyo. You got off of Noah Fant, which, you know, I think that was the right thing to do at this stage. Arroyo, even though he isn't my favorite prospect, is an athletic tight end that can work the seams, can work downfield, and can do a lot of things in the receiving game. Still not there as a run blocker yet, and we'll see if he can ever develop that, but that's also why you have an AJ Barner there too. So I do think there is something unique about this offense that you don't see elsewhere, and that is two guys who can dominate in the underneath and intermediate game. It reminds me in a way, loosely, of what Kansas City has with Travis Kelce and with Rashee Rice. When they're healthy, Rice and Kelce can just dominate the intermediate and underneath short passing game. And when they stay on track, it's very difficult to stop that offense. The problem, though, with this style of offense, in which I think they're going to go with, which is going to be a methodical, 10-plus play drive to score, is that if you do give up a sack, or if you do not have the ground game that can consistently get you 3 to 4 yards, your offense can stall sometimes, right? I don't think this is going to be a very high-powered offense that is going to go out there and score points in bunches, right? Like Philadelphia can do that on the occasion. Miami has done it. Cincinnati can do it. Baltimore, Buffalo, those teams can do that. This Seattle team is not really going to be like that. They're going to be a team that's going to rely on their defense to keep them, keep the games close, while their offense might be, coming up the gates a bit slow. But once they do get going, once they do get in a rhythm, they're going to be a really tough offense to stop. The one thing that can kill this offense is going to be this offensive line. I have a bad feeling that if this offensive line gets injured or sucks, this offense is not going to be very good. But, and this is a big but, if this offensive line is good to league average, this offense could be a little bit underrated and honestly kind of fun to watch. I think another X factor to talk about here is the running back play. Can they get elite production this year? Can they get Kenneth Walker to over 1,000? Or can they get Kenneth to 8,900? Can they get Zach to 8,900 too? Because if you can have both those guys doing, big numbers, then it kind of just ends up, working out for both. This is going to come down to the offensive line. I think they have the talent in the running back room, but that is also kind of a swing factor. I hope this offense is a bit more balanced. It appears they will be, and I'm really excited to see it. Now, we haven't had the conversation about Sam Darnold, and neither with Jalen Milroe. Let's start off with Milroe, developmental guy. I think he's 3 to 4 years from any sort of serious conversation to play on the field, unless he just dazzles during training camp and during preseason, but not expecting too much. For Sam, look, Sam is a quality starting quarterback. And one thing that I talk about often on my podcast is the price of quarterbacks. Dak Prescott, $60 million. Trevor Lawrence, $55. Tua, $55 million. Sam Darnold's not terribly far away from those guys. In fact, last year, he was arguably better than all of those guys. And, even though Dak didn't play most of the year, he was better than Dak for that beginning portion of the year. Darnold was really good last year. The risky bet, though, is the fact that he was a one-year guy. I mean, every year prior to that last year, he was not very good. And when you're in a Kevin O'Connell system, it maybe makes things a little bit easier. So we'll see if Darnold can replicate success he had last year to this year, maybe even a little bit better. I do worry about the offensive line and Darnold's issues with handling pressure. But again, I do think this will be a team that's going to rely on their defense and just really needs their offense to be about league average. Which that then brings me into my third reason as to why I believe the Seattle Seahawks are a force or a threat in the NFC. And that is that we are getting year 2 of Mike Macdonald. Now, this one is really more interesting because he is the head coach, but he's also part of their defensive coordinator too. So I'm specifically going to focus in on the defense, but in some ways it'll also tie into their offense. You rarely ever see a year 1 head coach step in there and instantly make a massive impact, unless your team is like talented, but just was so poorly coached, like the Chargers, for example, that were so poorly coached for so many years. And then you bring in Harbaugh, and then Harbaugh is a good enough coach to get them to the playoffs. This Seattle team was not horribly coached with Pete Carroll. It was a fine coached team that was just kind of needing a change. And McDonald steps in. He's able to push the change, build a culture, build an identity, but it's going to take time, right? It's not going to be a one-year fix. especially when they were a competitive team with Pete Carroll. So I think to anyone who expected McDonald to step in there last year and completely just turn them around, make them a title contender, like that was just ridiculous expectations. Hopefully I didn't say that last offseason. You could fact check me on that one. I don't think I said that. If I did, my bad. But now we're getting into year 2, and this is really where you want to see the steps. This was a team last year that was really close to making the playoffs, and I want to see them this year take that next step. I think the expectation should be, let's make the playoffs. Let's get into a playoff matchup, and let's see what this defense can do in the playoffs. I'm not saying they're going to win a playoff game or make a deep run or be a 13-plus win team. Can we make some noise there? Can we make a very competitive wild card game versus a top contender? Can we get to that second round and put up a fight against a Philly or, one of those top contending teams? So that's what I want to see from Seattle this year. And you're now getting into year 2 of the system. So all the stuff last year that took a little bit of some time to get used to adjust to, the players fitting in with the culture, fitting with the identity, that should not be an issue. You're now getting a complete full off season of McDonald installing his defense, game planning, having those, relationships already established. That should not be an issue this year. I want to see that start from week 1 this year and carry over to week 18. And if that can, I am expecting a bit of a jump. Last year, they won 10 games. I think 11 or 12 games is very reasonable to talk about here. I think this defense should take a big step forward from a decent defense last year to truly one of the better defenses this year. Like they should be about a top 10 defense with that head coach, with all the talent on this defense. They should be about a top 10 level defense. And all this offense really has to do is just do their job, score enough points, because this defense will give you opportunities to win games. And if they do, this is a Seahawks team that, they're not terribly far away. And when I look at their schedule, I gotta be honest with you, this is a relatively easy schedule. I'll make this very quick, but you're seeing the schedule right now. San Francisco, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Arizona, Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Houston, bye. Pretty easy up to that level. A couple tough ones here and there, but pretty easy. Washington, Arizona, LA, Tennessee, Minnesota, Atlanta, Indy, LA, Carolina, San Francisco. Kind of the same story. Not a very difficult schedule. Definitely not an easy schedule, but you have easy matchup, semi-difficult, difficult, easy, yeah, etc. So this is a winnable schedule, and I think there should be some expectations for McDonald to take that next step. And with this roster, with what this team is building, with how everything is going, I think McDonald in year 2 can really start to put the pieces together. And the hope is you elevate every year. So year 1, you just miss the playoffs. Year 2, which is this year, you make the playoffs. Maybe you make some noise. Year 3, you get into the playoffs, you win a playoff game, you make even more noise. Then year 4, you're Super Bowl contenders. You are contending for chips and for titles. So let's see if he can take those steps forward, if he can climb the ladder. And I think that's going to make it a very interesting thing. So here are my 3 reasons as to why the Seattle Seahawks will be threats in the NFC. You let me know in the comment section below. What is your record prediction for the Seattle Seahawks? Let me know down below. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.